You really need to find people that are actually passionate about the problem that you're solving. They think that, what the company is doing is cool.
Hello, it's Mark Jackson, and I'm the host of the Do HR. And today we're excited that we have the CEO, Patric Palm of Favro, a collaboration platform. Welcome, Patric.
Hey, I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. So I wonder if we could start, if you could share a few things about your background, what has brought you to where you are today with your platform.
So, I guess, I would call myself a serial entrepreneur. It's my third time as CEO, and there's been a couple of other companies that started as well. So I think that's my primary identity, as an entrepreneur in the tech industry, mostly within the computer game part of the tech industry, but also things like deep tech and Favro is a SaaS company. I'm also running a small investment company where I'm mainly investing in games and game tech, but also AI. Deep tech, some beverage and food, more on the kind of, let's say, next generation side of things. So it's nice to sometimes sit on the other side of the table. And before this, I was a late bloomer, I would say, when it comes to being an entrepreneur. Often when I speak to other entrepreneurs, they always have a story on how super early they started their entrepreneurial career, and it wasn't like that for me. My parents were working in government and at academia, and I was not set on an entrepreneurial career. But I had my first kind of interesting awakening when I did military service. I was quite a bohemian, in high school. I had long hair, started film society, and didn't really think I was the military type. But my grandfather on my father's side, he was an officer in the military, and I kind of felt like it's one of those things that you have to do to grow up. So I willingly, did all the tests and all that. And then I thought I would go into engineering troops, and I was going to suggest, to this officer that I would instead do some kind of photo ops because I like photography.
Yeah.
And that plan didn't work out at all because, this officer, he said, well, you can do the photo ops, but that would be a waste of talent because you have really good test results. I was a little bit more muscular at the time. And my head in the right place. So he was like, well, I wanted to be a platoon leader, of this Air Force Light Infantry platoon, and I was like, well, that sounds like it's going to be very cold because it was very far up in the north in Sweden. I was like, am I going to freeze my feet off? And he was just looking at me. He was like, son, that's going to be the least of your problems, So, but I made one of the best decisions in my life. I said yes, and that was a first, very true leadership experience, because before that, everything was just play, and now suddenly, you're like, it's minus, 35 degrees Celsius. You have 5 platoons out in the field, they need to be fed, they need to be warm, they need to perform when we, simulate battle, all of these kind of things, keeping morale up. It was really tough. But, long story short, I came out very good as I graduated as a shared course 1. And then I was asked if I wanted to continue in the military, and I thought, well, I'm going to university, but is there some kind of in the reserve kind of way, and there was that path. So while I was studying at university, Uppsala University, then I had a chance to work extra as a leadership instructor and also as an instructor for the Air Force Light Infantry. And I learned so much from that. And, the funny thing is that, the leadership principles around a small autonomous teams, far out in the woods, it's not so different from a small autonomous software team who's going to make the impossible, So, I learned that connection I learned later, but I just love the whole leadership aspect of things, both practically, but also I started getting interested in it from a more academic point of view. So even though I was studying, technology, with all the math and physics and all that, and also business administration and economics, I did also study to get a bachelor in social psychology. I never finished it. I was just one thesis away from it, but I did study most of it. And it was just so interesting. I love the whole how do people organize themselves? How big of a difference is it when people organize themselves and perform poorly versus when people organize themselves and perform amazingly? That enormous delta was a huge inspiration. And I mean, later, a few iterations here kind of led me into starting companies that are working with creating, tools that can help, people organize in just a much, much better way.
To help teams that are warm.
Help them make themselves warm.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you give us just kind of a synopsis of what exactly the platform is and who's using the software and is getting the most value?
Yeah, so Favro is an enterprise-grade platform for collaborative planning. So what that means is basically that teams in an organization, and in our case, an organization are typically SaaS companies, software as a service companies, or it is game studios and publishers. They can be venture-backed or publisher-owned or on a publishing level. And also some enterprises that just wants to be more agile in how they work. They would be our typical clients. And I would say right now there's a lot of push around kind of game companies for us, because it's just so much happening in that market. And what they use it for is that they basically plan and organize their work using our platform. So normally they would have before used things like Jira, or Monday, or Asana, or spreadsheets, and different teams typically prefer different tools. So you might have some engineers, they like one tool, and then you have some people in marketing, they like another tool, and so forth. And what Favro is very, very strong at and designed for is that it really adapts to the needs of each of these teams. So they can actually run things quite differently. So instead of having like many different tools, maybe integrated with Favro, you can use a single tool, and you can kind of like choose whatever way you want to view, the planning. So basically, Favro as an agile tool is very agile in how it adapts to the individual team's needs. So that's kind of like step one of our design principles. The other thing is that what really makes the difference in these organizations is if they can achieve high level of team autonomy, and where these teams are aligning to company goals without the typical micromanagement or the centralization that comes with tools like, for example, Jira. So in Favro, it's a decentralized model, and it allows leaders to be more kind of coaches, more kind of watching flow rather than micromanaging things. So if you take a very easy classic example, you have the product team and the marketing team in a SaaS company or a game company, like live games company, and they're releasing on a weekly basis or maybe even more frequent. Having their planning in sync, if you can have the teams taking care of that themselves, it's amazing. It will bring you huge benefits instead of trying to coordinate this, by some managers just dictating. And especially now in the kind of post-COVID era, where most teams are working, remotely or partly remotely, no one wants to be micromanaged by Zoom. So it's if the teams can handle this themselves, and the manager can take more of a coaching role, it's fantastic. It just becomes way more efficient. And then of course, there's things to this that have to do with not only between these teams. It's also, how you work with externals. So it can be external development. That's a classic case for us. For example, in the game industry, a lot of, let's say, your art production will be from an external company, and you want them to feel more like an extension of your team rather than, throwing, things over the wall. But it can also be things like, working with a marketing agency or recruiter and having them as like an extension of your team. Then, finally, it's a whole management layer. I mean, it's just a fact of nature that, senior managers are typically, a bit more senior, and it means that they're used to tools from yesterday. And now suddenly, you get this like silo between what happens in teams that may be working in a more modern way and what happens on the management layer. And you want to break that silo and also make that more collaborative. But then, the tools to use, in this case, while using Favro, needs to be something that these managers actually like to use, and where it becomes more of a collaborative effort, between the teams and the management instead of just like top down.
I'm seeing a lot of connection between the military side and kind of your ethos of the platform, just decentralized command, initiative, and also, the power of teams having ownership, so they own the project as opposed to it being somebody else's project and they're being watched or told what to do. They're much stronger when they're in that sort of a position.
Yeah. I mean, what you're describing is basically mission command, which, if you need to operate, behind enemy lines or even not even that, but in tough, if you go back to Operation Desert Storm, very bad weather, bad conditions, units need to operate autonomously. Obviously, that kind of went pretty well, but it goes back further. I mean, I don't know if you read the book called The Art of Action by Stephen Bungie. He's a military historian, but also a former management consultant at BCG. And he basically writes about this. He says that, in war, we much earlier came to a point where everything was just so chaotic that a very centralized command and control model was just not very efficient anymore. And you needed something else, which ultimately led up to, mission command. And what he's arguing in this book is that he says, well, business have now come to the same point, that everything is just moving so fast, it's so chaotic that, centralized command and control model just doesn't, do it very well anymore. So you need to, adopt a model with, much higher level of autonomy with the teams.
Yeah, your team leads would be like the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers out in the field making decisions based on past experience. I have to ask you, sorry, I meant to ask at the beginning, where did the name come from? Just
Favro?
Meaning? Yeah.
No, it actually doesn't. It's kind of, it's actually a very boring story. We had this great consultant who's also an artist. And our team, a lot of people in our team are former game developers. So obviously, they're very connected to a more creative side of things. And, the team clicked very well with her. And, she had a very, very good process in how she came up with many names and how we kind of had a selection process and, how we figured out that, making sure that this name didn't mean something very strange, in some foreign language. And then finally, what ultimately made it, we liked this name, we also liked another name, but ultimately we thought we could make a much better logo out of this name than the other one. So this is why we picked Favro.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, thanks. So, collaboration platforms are, quite competitive industry, and there's a lot of major players. You mentioned them at the beginning. I won't mention them again, but it's a two-part question. The first is, why did you choose to niche down and serve SaaS and game companies? And the second is, I did notice on your G2 reviews that you actually have the highest user adoption in 2023. So I wanted you to give me some background on that as well.
Okay, so the first question is a huge question. That's obviously what any of our investors definitely want to discuss deeper, before they made their investment. I'll see if I can break that down in a not too long way. So firstly, if you look, as you said, it's a very competitive market, and one of the reasons it's competitive is because working together online, it's just such a massive market, and I think. We were going towards this anyways before COVID, but COVID definitely, made it switch from that. The natural place where work happens is no longer the water cooler. It is actually online. So what happens? So the relative importance of the tools that you use is just much higher. Before you can be like, we're going to use some Post-it notes and, maybe we do a little bit of documentation and we're fine. But that doesn't cut it anymore. You really need to make sure that you have, your online setup is going to be extremely important for your company. And, one of the main things that, that many leaders don't think about is also that it shapes your culture. If you are choosing tools that are very focused on a very, let's say, centralized way of doing things, well, then your organization is going to be like that. Versus if you're picking tools that are very highly collaborative. You're picking, let's say, Figma for design, you're picking Favro for planning and collaboration. You have a very collaborative approach in, let's say, how you do with code. then your culture is going to be like that. So most executive leaders, they understand the importance of culture, but they might not yet have understood how much the tools will actually affect that. So I would say that it's just such an enormously large market. And sometimes I make it the comparison to the restaurant business. I mean, people go out and eat. It's like, going out, like eating is a huge market, but it's also ridiculously competitive. But it's not without trends. If you look at, for example, the restaurant, industry, there are very strong trends around more healthy food. People might still want food which is fast, but they don't want fast and unhealthy. They want fast and healthy, and if you look, for example, you have a ton of apps and food companies, that has to do with the trend around, keto diet. Just to give you one example, that didn't exist 5 years ago. That's like it's a niche, but it's an enormously fast growing niche. From an investor point of view, it's like super interesting. But you also have like much bigger kind of mega trends that are disrupting companies like, McDonald's, etc. So even in something like huge, like, simply food, the market as a whole might not be growing enormously per year. It probably grows roughly the same as the population. I might be very wrong about that. Maybe it grows faster or slower. I don't know. But taking just very ballpark numbers, roughly like that. But then within it, you have trends that are actually very strong. And it's the same thing for us. It's, the whole collaboration space. Obviously we come from the agile background, with agile software development. And that was like a big new thing in the 90s and early, 2000s. But then it became basically the norm within software development. And now it's more about like, how do you do it well? But it's spreading. Every company, I will see ads by, some of the biggest, software enterprises, selling their products, and everyone is going to put agile somewhere there. They're going to be like, this, we will help you make your business more agile, because everyone understands that adaptability to very rapid market changes, that's everything today. So everyone wants to kind of be in that space. Then in some cases, maybe it's more talks than an action. But so what I'm trying to say here is that, there are also within our space, trends within, that huge market that are growing much, much faster than the rest of the market and disrupting the rest. And specifically then about SaaS and games. So if I start with games, well, who doesn't like games? I've been playing computer games since I was a kid. And it's just such an enormously interesting market. And today, it's bigger than the movie, industry. I think bigger than the movie and the game industry combined. And it's just the biggest cultural expression. And also from a financial point of view, it's just way more money in it. So even though the economy is pretty shaky right now, there's still a lot of investment going into, entirely new game companies. So it's just a very, very interesting market to be in. And we always liked, when it's very complex. And if you look at games today, this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about SaaS, is that if you look at a game 10 years ago, you would make the game over a period of time. It's complete, you put it on a CD and you ship it to the market. It doesn't work like that anymore. Today, most games are, live services. So, you make the game, you release the game, but that's just the beginning. That's where the journey starts, really, and you're going to be expected to release new things every week, both when it comes to new, features, characters, other art assets, other content, events, how your community interact. It's highly complex and very fast paced. But the interesting thing is that if I then switch from games, which, if we talk about games as a service, which is basically doing the game version of software as a service, then you have all the other software as a service companies. And, a few years back, we have this, famous, Mark Andreessen quote of, software is eating the world. But today, that already happens. Today's it's like, software as a service is eating software, So everything is becoming software as a service. And what we're believing is that if we can be the leader within, the absolutely most demanding SaaS companies and game companies are basically a subpart of that because they are, one of the most demanding software as a service company categories. Then, in the future, when enterprises are more aggressively becoming SaaS companies, they already started, but they will be moving, in this direction. We will be very, very well positioned to take a much, much bigger chunk of the market.
Interesting. So you're kind of like at the tip of the spear in terms of, web future, and just think that everybody else will start naturally gravitating towards that area.
Yeah.
It's interesting thought. Now, how do you account for the incredible user adoption? I actually haven't seen that award on G2 previously. So highest user adoption. So what would you say about that? Like, how did you acquire that?
Well, I think, when it comes to all of these, I really like G2 because it's based on reviews by people using the tool, versus with, some other, players out there competing with G2. It's more about, what an analyst thinks, and very often they will gravitate towards, well, who is the biggest? And I think, when you look at our reviews, I think there's two parts here. One part is simply the product, which is, it's a double-edged sword because we also get bad reviews. But the funny thing is that when we get a bad review, typically, they're just trying to send us a signal. They actually normally, because sometimes we contact them, it's like, hey, maybe we can help. Something went wrong here. What's the bug? We can fix the bug. Why did you not find this intuitive? And maybe it's more of a training question. Very often that's the case. So often, when we have a bad review, it's someone who's actually very passionate. And so ultimately they actually really like us, but they're just so frustrated about those things that they do not like, it's, I always, you have to remember I'm from Sweden, and in Sweden we like licorice, and only the Finnish like licorice even more than we do. So I always, but licorice, sorry?
Black licorice?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing with, black licorice is that it's a candy that it's not for everyone. So I normally say that, if I can choose between being vanilla that everyone likes, but no one is passionate about, versus licorice that some will not like at all, but some people will be like, this is the best thing ever, I would choose licorice, And I think it's a little bit like that with us, that I think even the bad reviews we have on G2 are typically, they bothered writing it, and then of course, we have a ton of really good reviews, and on the good ones, some of it is sort of about product, but I'm also extremely proud of everyone in our team who is having direct interaction with our customers, because we, over and over again get very good feedback about our customer service, that people say that, this is a whole different level than other people in the industry. And if you want, I can share our philosophy behind that, because it was not by accident. It's not, everyone's working hard, so it's not that we're working hard or have more people. We have actually much less people than others, and I think we have a pretty good kind of work-life balance in our company. But I can share the strategy, because I went to a seminar many years ago about kind of lean management, and they were talking about the problem and basically the metrics of when you're putting very low qualified staff in the front line, and then they have to escalate tier 2, and then they have to escalate to tier 3, and so finally, there's someone who actually knows what they're talking about. And they made some metaphors with, for example, hospitals. If you have an accident, you have 50 patients coming in, you need to make some extremely quick decisions on, where should who go, and you need very, very qualified people to do that. But if you can make those, so basically, if you're putting highly professional people in the front line, so you can make very quick decisions on, well, what kind of need, what kind of problem do we need to solve here? It saves the patient, and in our case, they're not patients, they're clients, but it makes them, much more happy because they instantly feel like, oh, I'm talking to someone who actually knows what they're talking about, and I instantly got help. So we actually don't have a very big team. We're trying to automate as much as we can. So a lot of the more simple questions, we go quite far, in how we, provide documentation for those things. But when someone is coming and they have a question, typically the questions we get are quite advanced. It's a game developer saying, hey, I have this external developer doing art asset development. How do I set up a pipeline with internal sign-offs for that? In Favro. I mean, that's not a trivial question. And the difference between doing it poorly and doing it the way you were doing it before in some other tool versus doing it in a really good way in Favro, in a way that only Favro can do it, compared to other tools. That delta is massive, and if we can, help them with that, very quickly, they're gonna be like, "Holy shit! What else do I not know?" So it builds a very good relationship.
That's great. And interestingly, you were talking about automation. I was thinking about something else that I wanted to ask you. I noticed about a month ago, you launched a hub with more than 60 custom templates, which, I love this type of thing in terms of using your expertise and helping people. I do user research testing, and the service I use they have an incredible database of structure and everything set up by really professional, like PhD level ethnographers and researchers and stuff like that. So it just makes it so easy. So what drove you to create that library?
It has a little bit to do with your previous question. We felt that there's like a middle level. It's like you have let's say the easy level questions that we get in our support, and you have like the really advanced one where we absolutely need to be involved and help the customer, which is included in our subscription. But there's also this kind of in between level where it's not trivial stuff. It's quite advanced, but it's also something we could automate. For example, that example I was giving before around, hey, we're setting up an external developer. That's something which is pretty good for a template. So we thought, let's just create a library of templates. This functionality basically have two parts. So one is that we have this whole 60 plus templates that are based upon best practices that we learned over the years. That you can just click them and get started. And we're gonna keep growing this, so it will be more over time. For example, now you have the Scale Agile framework being launched that are used by a lot of enterprises. It's just launched now in version 6, and we will launch very soon a template for that for the version 6. And a lot of people are asking about that because they're like, well, hey, we're interested in this new version 6 of the SAFe framework. Hey, Favro, do you support that? So instead of like every time answer that question like yes, let us show you how. We can just say yes, here's a link. Just push the button and you have it. So that's one thing. But the other side of this is that what very often happens in bigger organizations is that they have their way of doing things, they have their flavor. So if you take, for example, that template for how you will do collaboration with an outsourcing partner, they can tweak that template. So it becomes their version, and then they can save it as something in their library. So they're basically building their own library. So Company X library of templates, which is very organic. They can keep updating that and so forth. So that allows for a very modern way of doing a product management office. I mean, in the old days, the product management office might be very, let's say, controlling. They might say, hey, this is the way to do it. You have to use this tool, and this is the process you're going to use. And no team really likes that. They're like, well, thank you, but we're actually doing it this way. And it causes frictions in the organization. So what you can do instead is that you can have a more agile product management office that says, hey, we're more like moderators, or let's say maybe curators of how do we get notice sharing between these teams. And we're using this tool called Favro, so why don't you share your template here in our library, and we will actually promote it to the rest of the organization. Say, hey, this team, they came up with this really, really good process for how to set up collaboration with an external outsourcer. You can benefit from that. You just need to push this button. It's a much more modern and better way to create knowledge sharing, in an organization.
I agree. I wanted to bring up a blog post of yours I read from, I think, late summer of last year, because obviously we're the new HR, so we talk about HR topics as well. So I wanted to get your thoughts on remote work and how to build company culture with IT. Could you kind of give us the high level?
Yeah. I also did a really good podcast with the head of IT at Volt. I think he had a lot of really good ideas about that, a very kind of forward-thinking head of IT. So I can recommend that one also. But generally speaking, I would say that you have to think about it. I was about to say from the beginning, but that might not be true. It's more about, you have to think about it deeper, so to say. You can't just take what you have as a culture and then do some tweaks and then now you're fine, because then it's always going to feel like it's a second best version, and everyone's going to be like, well, we're just waiting until we can do it in the normal way. You have to think more deeply. What does this mean? And there's a couple of things to keep in mind. That this can be a very, very long conversation. So I'll just give you a couple of points. Okay.
Sure.
So one of them is that you need to have a setup around asynchronous communication and collaboration. So, for example, using something like Slack is a very good idea. Also, maybe have some policies around how you use Slack. Like when are you supposed to be online, not online? What is expected response time? Things like that. So, and it doesn't have to be the same for the whole company. It can actually be different in different teams. But just making some kind of policy or framework around, like, hey, what's the rules of the game? In our team, in how we use asynchronous communication over Slack. So that's an important thing. Then I'm going to say the obvious, which is of course something like Favro. We highly collaborative, highly asynchronous when it comes to the whole planning process. So I'm saying the obvious here. But then you have also things like people where you just have to accept that different people are going to thrive more or less in this environment. I've been giving a lot of interviews around how to lead introverts before COVID. And the funny thing during COVID was that people that are, let's say, a little bit more introverted typically thrived more versus the ones struggling were extroverts. So I actually had more kind of interviews around, well, how to lead extroverts in times of COVID. I give you a concrete example. Let's say that you're working 100% remote because of a pandemic or for other reasons, and you're just suddenly calling on the phone, like a normal phone number, someone who's an introvert to say, hey, we need to make a decision about this. What do you think? That's very often not appreciated. People that are a little bit more on the introvert side, they want to have information beforehand. They want to have a little bit of time to think it through. And they want to know when we're going to talk about this so they can be prepared. And then you have this conversation. You're going to keep the conversation, the meeting short. You make the decision, and then you go. But in these times when you are very, highly remote, the extrovert will typically love that suddenly there's a phone call from you, like, hey, I'm just checking in. How's it going? Everything fine? Just chit chat a little bit, and maybe not have to do so many decisions. And they will actually appreciate that. Obviously, I'm doing huge generalizations now, so I'm probably stepping on some toes. So who's listening? But just reflecting upon these things, because to be honest, most leaders, they don't even think about this at all. Just thinking about about these things, takes you very, very far. And then you have others. You have also things like company culture in terms of after work. If you have I think it's always a good idea to make the culture about the work and not about what happens around the work. I think that's great in any company. That's just my opinion. I think that leads to higher efficiency, higher level of loyalty, trust, everything. But it becomes even more important, in a highly remote, organization, because you're not going to have, the Thursday and Friday after work beers, because you can't. And if I take just Favro as an example, for us, it's also been great because we have a very, very diverse group of people, different religions, different. We have some people that, absolutely love going out, having a beer with colleagues after work. But then we have people that don't want to have a beer after work because they don't drink, because of religious reasons, or because they, crazy CrossFitters, and they don't drink because of that, and they're going to go to gym instead, they're like, I'm not going to go to the bar, I'm going to go to the gym, So for us, it's been easy to be more inclusive, and no one will feel like, oh, I missed that after work, so I'm not really part of the team. Everyone's really part of the team, even if they are, far away. So what we actually do instead is that we play a lot of games. I mean, we obviously have a lot of game customers. So when we have our Friday all hands meeting, we start by playing some, casual games like, Stumble Guys and things like that, or Among Us, and everyone can participate. And then, later in the evening, we will do more hardcore gaming, like, playing Warzone or something like that. For the ones, who like that. So it's, it's a little bit different culture. And we do have people going out drinking beer as well. But it's not like company culture,
Sure. So tell me, how do you attract new talent to your organization, and how do you evaluate your candidates when you're looking to hire them? It's interesting. I'm curious on your answer because you have such a diverse workforce.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm going to disappoint you that I don't think we cracked it yet. Really, it's really hard. Firstly, my experience from not only Favro but also other companies I built directly or indirectly been part of building. You often find the people that really work out in the places that you didn't expect, and sometimes you make hires that you're very sure about. It does not work out. And then you make hires where you're like, I really don't know, but it feels good and I'm going to make a leap. And it turns out fantastic. So I think, one of the first things you simply need to accept is that it's not a precise science. I think the other thing is, for us, it's been very, and I also seen this with many of our clients, to be honest. I think this is probably a good advice. You really need to find people that are actually passionate about the problem that you're solving. They think that, what the company is doing is cool. One mistake you can do is that if you hire people because you're using, let's say, a certain technology, a certain framework, and they say, oh, I would really like to work in this company because I really like, that you're using this technology and I'm really, really interested in this technology. That can go really, really wrong because they have their loyalty to technology and not to the company. And they say that you need to make a decision to actually change that framework because those kind of decisions happens all the time. Then suddenly, you're going to have disgruntled employees, but for very unnecessary reasons, so to say. So I think, really, finding people that really, that actually like the product, and what you can interview around that. For example, if you have someone who's maybe been using a tool like this, I'll give you a great example. So, a disgruntled Jira programmer, so someone has been using Jira and it looks like, I really hate that tool. It's like, if just anyone can make something better, it's like, you would make life better for developers all over the world. And I want to be part of that. That's a great. I mean, obviously we're primarily hiring the person for this person's programming skills.
Yeah.
And some other, qualities. But if this person have this attitude, it's awesome, because then they're gonna be passionate about what we do. The other thing I would say is that we are probably putting a relatively high emphasis on adding to the team culture. So we do want to have a diverse team, and we're doing I mean, we're doing a lot of these kind of psychology tests and kind of problem solving tests, and I know it's controversial. It goes in ways. Sometimes newspapers are saying it's are writing articles around that in a negative way, and sometimes they're writing articles in an extremely positive way. So it's one of those. But we don't use it as a qualifier. Well, we used to use it as a qualifier to some extent. For example, on the logic side, and there are certain profiles, that we would prefer more than other profiles and it also is different for different kind of positions. It's not the same for a programmer versus a salesperson, but it leads to very good conversations. I mean, I'm kind of giving it away now, but a person who is extremely stubborn and skeptic to this and absolutely don't want to discuss this result and think this is rubbish, that might be a bit of a red flag, versus someone who said, that was very interesting. I really agreed with that and that, but this is something I haven't really thought about, and can actually have like a smart conversation around it. I think that's a very positive signal. It's like, okay, cool. This is someone who's willing to, be open, and in the previous podcast I was just doing, they were talking about, leaders that can admit that they're wrong, how important that is, and how unusual it is. I think having that kind of open attitude, I mean, goes for everyone, including myself. Like, we're gonna get things wrong. But also you have to, and again, this goes all the way from CEO to intern, that you need to admit that you are wrong and adapt. But also you need to have an opinion, because you have the flip side of that. You have people who says, well, I don't know, I don't care. I mean, you decide. It's very, very hard to be a team member to someone like that, and also very hard to be a leader when you have people like that in your team, because then everything is your problem. In a highly autonomous team, basically everyone's a leader. So, everyone's going to, every person in the team is going to be the best at something in that team. And when you get to the point where, that people needs to like speak up and say, you know what, I think this and this and this, doesn't mean that everyone's going to be like, okay, you know best, let's do this. But, it should be the starting point of a conversation. And then, you decide, A or B. But just, having that dynamic is like so important. So, to summarize, you don't want to have people who can never be wrong, but also you don't want to have people who doesn't dare having an opinion. You need balance in between.
Somebody that doesn't always blow with the wind, and somebody that isn't resistant to being. Yeah, you have to have openness, but definitely letting all of the people know on your team that you expect leadership from them, and teaching them how to lead up the chain of command. Because traditionally, everybody thinks leadership is top down, right? That's the way leadership flows. From recent experience with me, it flows better actually from the bottom up. You get people that are engaging directly with your customers, and they have the real gold in terms of what your customers want and are feeling. And as a CEO, you're just one guy. You have an entire team of people, and I'm sure you have great ideas, but I'm sure they have a lot more great ideas, just because of the fact that there's the sheer number of people on the team, and making sure that there's a good flow back and forth. How can your tool help remote teams build strong connections between them?
So maybe I can start with something you just said in the previous kind of sentence as a segue there, because one thing that the previous company I was CEO of, Handsoft, one of the things that the team got really good at, the team they were extremely when my fellow founders and I sold that company, the buyers, they didn't need us. We were totally redundant because this team was running itself. And one of the things they did, one practice they had they were really good at, was that every time, when they were, prioritizing, different features to develop, or if it was a marketing campaign, or basically anything in the company. But developing new features is a pretty clear example. What they always had to link, in the tool, and you can do the same in Favro, by the way. But you had to link, in the tool, which of our kind of company initiatives or company epics, as it was called, does this relate to? So the things that we now have decided that we're gonna prioritize and we're gonna put effort into, which initiative does this correspond to? And it makes it very easy for leadership. It really allows the bottom up leadership, as you were mentioning, because the top person doesn't have to say, do this, do this, do that. And the team, basically aligns, it's like, okay, the list of initiatives is very clear. Good. And now we're committing to doing these kind of things for the coming month or coming, 2 weeks, if you run 2 week sprints, because, these are related, to those initiatives. And this is, going back to, this saying, that, alignment enables autonomy. So, the team here, they are extremely autonomous. But they can be extremely autonomous because they are themselves aligning, to, where this company is going. It doesn't have to be a top-down process. It's actually, very kind of, it goes both ways, basically. So I think that's a great example, very practically, what this looks like. Because the thing that very often goes wrong in many teams is that, you get into, and especially like really big corporates, but it can happen in small organizations too, that you will have, teams or team members saying that, hey, I want to be more autonomous. I want to do whatever I want. It's like, well, it's not a kindergarten, it's a company. There's actually, there are things we need to align to. And I mean, if you are very good at constantly picking the right things and doing it in the right way, and the right way depends, of course, let's say if it's a game company, it might be around a creative vision. That's going to earn a lot of trust, and then you get even more autonomy. So, trust enables autonomy, and trust comes from, alignment. So, there's this, you need to get those kind of things right, and it's definitely much easier said than done. And this is maybe not a very popular thing to say, but it's really not only a question around the leaders you recruit. It's equally a question around the team members you're hiring, because you can have amazing leaders, but it's going to be no use if you don't have a team that understands these things or cares. And there are companies where they have a company culture where you will have people say, well, just tell me what to do. I don't want to. If I need to tell what I'm going to do, I want to be a lead. I want to be a lead and have a higher pay, and also it's a difference between countries here. This comes a little bit more naturally in some countries, like for example Sweden, and let's say the more command and control model works relatively better in some other countries. So it's these things are pretty hard. Sometimes if you do like an agile leadership course, it will be like, okay, self-organizing teams is great. Just let them go and do what they want. It's like, well, sure, you can do that if you have an endless amount of money, but it's actually not the road to success. It's a little bit more complicated.
So, that's great thoughts. I kind of wanted to bring it back to yourself. So, obviously, you use your own platform. So, is there anything that's your platform has helped you with in terms of automating your day-to-day planning or any tasks? Do you have any examples of how you run things internally?
Well, I think the big thing is that both my two fellow founders and I are we kind of product people at heart. So when we think about these kind of platforms, we definitely think about it as, a way to create products in a very efficient way. We think about the very complex process of creating a product. But one of the things that have been extremely helpful, for me, is that people I have around me that are into, people management, administration, marketing, seeing them, being able to use our platform in a very, very efficient way and allow them to be not only super efficient, but, being efficient, by being much more autonomous. If I take, our company, just seeing how product and marketing is collaborating on a weekly basis with, if you ask my teammates, they will probably say that I interfere from time to time and have opinions about things. But if I take a meta view on this and I would compare it to just generally organizations, they are extremely autonomous in how the whole process of releasing new feature. What does that mean in marketing? What does it mean in what we're pushing out to our customers? That whole process is extremely autonomous in our company, and I'm very proud of that. That's something that the tool enabled, and it would look very, very different if we would not have had Favro.
It's good to hear that they're autonomous, because quite often, leaders can kind of be roadblocks to things and slow things down. Whereas if people have control, they can work decentralized. The velocity definitely increases, I find.
Yeah. And again, as I said, if you would ask, let's say, the visual designer in our marketing team, he would probably say that I am more of a blocker than he would like, because sometimes I do have an opinion. But then I compare that to, a game studio maybe I worked with before, where, they have decided that every art asset needs to be signed off, by CEO or someone. And what the team then needs to be doing is that they need to start deciding a process where to circumvent this because it's not possible. And you start having an organization which is just, very, very political and very, it's like they have one official way of working, but then they have the real way of working. And I would like to think in our case that, whenever we actually have a little bit of friction around something did get a little bit blocked, because I didn't need to look at it and I was not as fast as they wanted, because that typically happens when you're CEO. It's seldom enough that they care. It's seldom enough that they give me shit for it. Versus, in I would say most companies, they're not even going to bother giving shit to the boss about this, because it's, we're just so far from, any level of true autonomy. So they just find ways around it. And we can talk about this for a long time. I've seen so many interesting examples.
So what can we expect from Favro in the future?
So we have some very, very exciting, things to be released soon. I think, one of the areas where we are relatively weak is dashboards, basically how you do reporting. And especially for teams within the quality assurance in game and software development, this is important, but also for other teams. And I think this is one of the areas where we're a little bit weak compared to Jira. So we've been showcasing an early working version of this for several of our customers, and they're absolutely raving about it. They think it's awesome. They want to have the early access. I think when we release this in the very near future, it's gonna be something pretty big. We also have built a very advanced system for aggregation or completion. Basically, what that means is that if you look at, you have normally two alternatives with the tools that are out there today. Either it's simply just chaos and siloed. So everyone's using different tools, and you just manually have to kind of report some kind of aggregation up, and you end up having, manager administering spreadsheets with that data, or even administrating or putting together PowerPoint presentations. And then you have the other version, which is very highly centralized. So there's a very linear way of doing this that might satisfy on the top, because they like, well, we get the report that we want, but the problem is that it doesn't really bend to the kind of agility which is needed in the teams. So it's a big, impediment for teams to actually work in a good way. And Favro up until now has been reasonably good at this, but it's been relatively dependent also on setting things up in the right way, where things can be very, very agile. You can have a higher level of autonomy in the teams, but to get the aggregation right, you have to set things up in the right way. And also, maybe actually an even bigger problem is that you also need to have a little bit the right methods for this. You have to be quite progressive in how you use agile methods. If you have too much of a blend between traditional and agile, it's not going to work so well. So what we've done now is a very, I would say, unique system in the industry where, how in a very flexible way you can set up how aggregation works. So even if you have some teams that are working in a more traditional way, so they set up their favorite collections, maybe not in a very agile way. They're using it, in a quite traditional fashion. And then you have other teams that maybe work in a very, very agile way. They say that they are both working on stuff which is connected to the same, bigger objective. You can actually create now an aggregation in a very simple way. You don't need any like engineers or IT to do this for you, like with other tools. The teams can set this up themselves. So it aggregates up to basically a completion, progress on a high level. So this kind of whole pyramid of how progress happens, you can make that happen without having to basically code it. You can just, it's like plugging cables together, on the way, and the teams can do this themselves.
That's great. Do you have a free demo with your platform?
Yeah. I mean, well, firstly, you can use it for free for 14 days. And we have, many different on our website. We have, articles, kind of connecting best practices with the practical examples in the tool. We have what we call how-to classes, which is, very, very hands-on. Here's for example, how do you work with, what does a task mean in a modern work environment? And what does that look like in Favro? And a couple of different flavors. So extremely hands-on, so stuff like that. And then, of course, we have the podcast where we will talk much more on the kind of level that you and I are talking right now, where, I would interview people like, hey, how do you recruit the best talent to a game studio 2023? What's different this year compared to 2 years ago? Stuff like that.
On that, just can you share what is different now between 2 years ago in terms of recruiting top talent for gaming?
Well, maybe it was bad I said 2 years ago because that was in the middle of COVID. So obviously, COVID made everything. So maybe an easier comparison is between, like now and before COVID. And I think big difference is some of the things we talked about today that, the more progressive companies, they have definitely realized that you need talent. I call it T-shaped personalities, they need to have a depth. They need to have that speciality that you hire them for. But they also, they need to have more of a, wide kind of, breadth of understanding other things, because that makes it so much easier for them to collaborate with others. So, if you, for example, recruit a programmer, in a game studio, if that programmer has a pretty good feeling for, well, what does it take to make good design? What does, good, let's say, level design look like? What does good character design look like? Also, if they understand a bit of production, it's like, well, what is good leadership, within the team? Instead of just pointing to like, well, you're the boss, you do it. I actually understand, like, well, how do we lead ourselves in this team? If you have people with those like T-shaped personalities, if you have a group of that, you're just going to work so much better together. So you really want to look for that. And I think people that were recruiting didn't, they were thinking more around the depth of the speciality before.
Interesting. Well, before wrapping up, I guess I should first say that I love black licorice. Just put that out there. But the question that we ask every guest, just kind of at the end to wrap up, is what do you think the future of the HR and collaboration industry is? And we normally ask 5 to 10 years, but like I always say, it could be 5 to 10 months. What does the future look like from where you're sitting?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna state probably the very obvious that everyone's thinking right now, and that is that AI will play a big part. It's just unavoidable. And it's gonna. I mean, there are already many companies started now that are doing some interesting things. But I think if we think 5 years in the future, there's going to be things that we didn't think about today. Well, someone is maybe thinking about it today and starting that new startup. That's going to do something really cool in 5 years. But I think from an HR point of view, also it's very it's also complicated, because at the same time as we have everything happening with AI, we also have a very, very strong trend not only in Europe but the whole world around data privacy. And this is very unaddressed question right now. I mean, this is a bomb waiting to explode in a way, because when you start applying a lot of AI to things that has to do with people, you're also getting into territory where it's also getting scary, and certain people are going to think it's very scary, and certain people might not care, and then we will see what the legislators are going to do here. So it's it's going to be a very bumpy road for sure, but bumpy roads are interesting.
Yeah.
So if everything is just stale and status quo, it's no fun being in that market. And if you have an industry that's just going through like a lot of change and disruption, it's a more interesting space to be in.
And that's where we grow as well. So thanks so much, Patric, for your time. I know you're very busy. So where can people learn more about your platform and get in touch with you? We'll definitely include some links in the show notes as well.
So the easiest is simply favro.com, and if you want to find those articles and how-to classes and podcast that I was mentioning, I mean, just go to Favro Academy on that website and you have everything there. I mean, I'm also on Twitter like everyone else, simply at Patric Palm. I mean, I guess LinkedIn is probably the platform I use the most. So people are welcome to follow me there as well. I do post mostly cool things about Favro there, but from time to time, something a little bit more personal as well. So
that's great. That's great. Thanks, Patric. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.